Hello there, you're watching the Press Preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the political journalist and broadcaster, Theo Usherwood, and the Belfast Telegraph columnist, Allison Morris. Welcome to both of you. Lovely to see you here. So, to the front pages then, let's start with the Eye. It calls the Prime Minister wounded as he faces multiple rebellions from his party as they consider voting against the Rwanda plan. The Times headlines lawyers' warnings to Mr Sunak that the plan could fail as it provides an easy way for migrants to avoid deportation. The Guardian says Mr Sunak is fighting to hold the Tories together as speculation that he could face a challenge to his own position grows. Insanity, that is what the Tory chairman told rebels who want to oust the PM. That's on the front page of the Telegraph. The Metro quotes the sister of head teacher Ruth Perry, who took her own life after an Ofsted report was highly critical of her school. Her sister says the education inspection system is guilty of brutal inhumanity. The Daily Mail runs an exclusive on the Culture Secretary saying it is morally indefensible to send people to jail over TV licences. The FT understands Labour has taken on 10 well-known city figures to advise them on how to win the confidence of the financial sector if they return to power. The Sun runs with a story on This Morning's staff being fearful of speaking out about Philip Schofield's affair. And the Star reports on an animal smuggler being caught with 2 otters down his pants. Well, a reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out those front pages for yourself while you listen to our guests. So let's head straight to Theo and Alison. Welcome to both of you. Febrile times in the Conservative Party once again. Goodness me. What are they doing? I think I'm quoting the Telegraph there anyway. Start with the Eye. The PM's wounded. He faces a growing rebellion. What's going to happen next, Theo?
The Conservative Party is again back in self-destruct mode, and it's all down to this Rwanda plan of Rishi Sunak. On the one hand, when this plan, this emergency legislation comes before the Commons next week, he has the One Nation Wets, Conservative Wets, who are very unhappy about it because, as the Home Secretary James cleverly said, he couldn't say whether it complied with the European Convention on Human Rights. And then on the other side, he has his own Eurosceptics, hardliners, who actually want Suella Bravermans of this world, who actually want the Conservative Party to commit, the government to commit to leaving the EHCR. So that's the problem Rishi Sunak has got. Can he get it? Can he actually get this legislation over the line? Beth, your political editor, was talking earlier about the probability that actually when the vote comes up on second reading next Tuesday, they will vote for it. They'll tick the box. They'll let it pass second reading, and then later this year, probably actually in the new year, they'll start amending it, and that's when the real row will happen. But undoubtedly, Rishi Sunak has a fight on his hands just to stay in number 10.
Picking it apart as it tears the party apart. And people at home will be sitting there going, if it's tearing the Conservative Party apart, why stick with it? And the point is, he's promised to stop the boats. Is that why, Alison?
That's it. And you could see he was standing in front of a lectern that said, stop the boats, when he was delivering this. You know, this is his election message. But also what we're also saying is, when the run-up to Brexit, there were people in the Conservative Party who quite liked to stay in favour of staying within the common market, but they wanted out of the European Court of Human Rights. And what we're saying now is that coming back to fruition, to come back to haunt Rishi Sunak. The ERG, along with members of the DUP, who stopped Theresa May getting her Brexit deal through, they want to completely abandon the European Court of Human Rights. And also, this is actually very similar to what's going on in Northern Ireland at the minute, because we currently have a court case in terms of the legacy bill that the British government have passed, which will give an amnesty to anyone who was involved in murders during our conflict. It has also been said that it does not comply with the European Court of Human Rights. So this is not something that is in isolation with this. What we're seeing is this Conservative government trying to pass bits of legislation which are clearly not compliant with Article 2 in the case of the Northern Ireland case, and in terms of people's right to life. And so I don't think that this will be the last either. You know, this is just pushing at the door to see how far they can get this through.
Yeah, and indeed the Americans watch, because the European Convention is supposed to underpin the Good Friday Agreement, isn't it? So it's absolutely critical for that. Let's move on to, there's the Eye, wounded PM facing a growing rebellion. The Guardian, Sunak fights to hold Tories together over his Rwanda plan. If the left of the party don't like it and the right of the party don't like it, you know, who does?
Well, it seems to me, and as if we're heading towards a general election fairly early within next year in the spring, because if he can't get this over, I mean, Rishi Sunak said today, and it was again in reply to Beth, in fact, it's not a confidence vote. But if he can't pass this legislation when it comes down to it, and if the row happens over the amendments later, further down the line, if he can't pass the legislation, then he's got nowhere. There are no more moves left. He can't do anything, and he's inevitably going to he's going to face a leadership challenge. And at that moment, does he say, "Well, actually, I'm not prepared to do that. I'm going to go to the country and make this an issue at the general election"?
So would he threaten those who are rebelling against him with the prospect of an election to keep them quiet, or not?
Well, that is a possibility that he could say to them, "Listen, we're so dire in the polls. If you don't behave yourself and get behind this plan, then we've got no chance of actually improving our standing, improving our situation, and you're most likely going to lose your seat at the next election," particularly when we're talking about MPs in red wall seats in the north of England and in the Midlands, where the majorities aren't that significant. He could say to them, people like Jonathan Gullis, for instance, you actually need to get on board with this plan, support this plan, even though you might prefer a more full-fat version where we leave the European Court of Human Rights, because if you don't, the inevitability is going to be that I'm going to have to go to the country. And where, given that the Tory party, at that stage might be, in a couple of months' time, 25, 30 points down, you're inevitably going to lose your seat. Why not give me the chance to pass the legislation, get some flights going to Rwanda, our standing then goes up in the polls, and we're prepared to be forgiven by voters in your constituency?
Yeah, the Times lawyers have warned the PM it won't work, is in here as well. It feels like they're trying to climb a hurdle, which they can't get over, and yet they put the hurdle there. That's kind of what it feels like. And I quoted Brenda from Bristol yesterday, not another one, and I meant in terms of not another Tory leadership challenge rather than another election. How many Tory leaders can you have without calling an election is the point, I suppose, because Boris Johnson was the last one.
It's almost like everyone gets to be the Tory leader at some stage in their life, isn't it? We'll all get a turn eventually if it keeps going like this. I do think that there is obviously rumblings of people who fancy themselves as being the next Tory leader, Stella Braverman, for a start.
So that's what we're witnessing, is it, do you think? Are we
that
seeing
she
the
has
positioning?
her eye on that prize and undermining Rishi Sunak at every chance that they get. And you can see that there's a growing section who are conspiring behind the scenes against their own leader and they're probably looking at being the leader of the opposition, because realistically, they're so far behind in the polls regarding no matter what goes on here, I don't think they're going to be able to pull it back again. And also then, what is the embarrassment if you do manage to get this legislation pushed through, but then at the last minute the plane gets stopped and there's another challenge and someone takes another case and the plane doesn't take off again? Well, then that's even worse, than not passing the legislation at all, because it just makes them look completely inept.
Well, the Prime Minister very firmly said if we went any further on this, it would collapse. Rwanda itself would pull the plug, which is the irony here, isn't it, I suppose?
The point is, when you devise a policy like this, and this was Boris Johnson, this belonged to Boris Johnson and Priti Patel, is you create the policy, and then what you do as a safety net is you have somebody to blame when it goes wrong. And that's what they did with Brexit, because when Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, they hadn't delivered Brexit, but then they could point the finger at the Speaker, the Supreme Court, Jeremy Corbyn, the SNP, and say, these are the people who are stopping Brexit from happening, vote for me and we can sort it out. The problem with this particular policy is they devised the policy. Was it ever going to be possible to get a flight with people who've arrived in this country to go to Rwanda? Probably not. But now they're blaming themselves. So they're tearing themselves apart. And actually, if they were going to do the politics of this correctly, and it is fairly sordid when you're talking about it like this, if they're going to do the politics correctly, then they would be pointing the finger rather at themselves and this circular firing squad at the Supreme Court that blocked them, at Labour and so forth. So that actually it becomes a populist agenda rather than ultimately what could prove to be the demise of Rishi Sunak.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? The Metro saying, quoting Sunak, I'll defy the courts to push through the Rwanda bill, even though he seems to suggest that his bill will be enough to satisfy the courts, which we know has got to the Supreme Court already. You say, well, maybe not. But, I mean, the point here is that will he sink himself over a policy that was, his predecessor but one's policy?
Yeah, I mean, it isn't his. It's a legacy issue that comes from Boris Johnson. He could have completely tried to change the narrative onto something else, but he seems to have wedded himself to this in a way that's going to be very difficult then to unravel and get him out of it.
Everyone says, it's really important in certain seats, red wall seats, for example. Scotland say they're desperate for migration. How big does it play in Northern Ireland?
I'm not sure. Well, I don't think it's a major issue. We have seen, and you can see there was riots in Dublin in the south of Ireland, where we do see a sort of growing group of of sort of far-right agitators in terms of migration, and because we've had a number of sort of high-profile crimes that have been committed by people who are new to Ireland. In Northern Ireland, we have very low rates of immigration compared to other regions. But I do laugh when you talk about getting Brexit done, because we have no government for 2 years, because according to the DUP, Brexit isn't done. In other parts of the UK, they may think Brexit's done, but you want to, take a skid across the water and you'll hear a very different narrative.
I don't doubt it.
Absolutely. Well, we will see what happens next, certainly. What's your best bet for the date of the election, then, Theo, before we move on?
It would. My best bet would be, and if you look back to what happened with the budget, then it would be in April, May. Well, May and a spring election, given what the promises made around national insurance. But actually, if you look at this, I mean, it will. If you want to try and unpick the next election, I mean, you just have to listen to the Commons business statement on a Thursday to find out exactly when the government announces committee stage and report stage of this legislation. And
well, I think
when
Rishi Sunak said to the 1922 committee, we've got a year to sort this out, so that might give us a bit of
It might find its way into some very long grass.
Exactly. In the meantime, Boris Johnson defending himself at the Covid inquiry. Alison, public perception of Partygate was absurd. It was a million miles away from reality, and so on. But accepting how damaging and upsetting it was for people to hear about it in the country.
He was very defensive, and also we have seen the reading out of those very embarrassing WhatsApp messages and text messages.
Well, not necessarily from him, obviously.
No, but members of his government using really unsavoury language and quite misogynist language in some cases as well. And there's allegations that there's a toxic environment within Boris Johnson's government at that time. He even admitted that a lot of those meetings took place were completely male-dominated. There was no female MP input into them at all. But, I mean, I think as far as Boris Johnson is concerned, this will not do him personally any harm. It's done and dusted. He's now on a speaking circuit, making money, doing public speaking. But I think for the people who were standing outside protesting, you do still feel for the people who lost loved ones at that time, because it wasn't even just the bereavement, it was the not being able to have funerals, not being able to visit people in hospital. And I don't think people get closure in grief if they've been left hanging like that. And you can see that there is still anger among them. Maybe the rest of us feel like COVID was some sort of fever dream that we've left behind. But I mean, the inquiry itself, I think, is important, because it's important to learn lessons. Should, and let's hope it never does, happen again, I think that we do need to learn lessons from that. But also, there were unprecedented times. It was impossible to say what was the right or wrong thing to do, because we'd never been through it before.
Yeah, and just quickly, Theo, he was asked, wasn't he, were you not being shamefully ageist towards those in later life and normalising their premature death? And earlier talked about older people and his attitudes to let it rip for them, etc. And he talked very emotionally about his own experience in hospital.
He did, and he used that as a way of trying to present to the inquiry that actually he did care, that it did matter to him what happened, because when he'd experienced it and he was admitted into intensive care at St Thomas's Hospital early on during the first wave of the pandemic, what he saw, what he witnessed, men his own age suffering as he was in hospital. And he was trying to, I thought he actually looked quite chastened during that, rather than that rather bullish caricature of himself, if you like, that he presented in front of the parliamentary inquiry into whether he lied to MPs. This time he looked rather more withdrawn, more reticent to kind of step out and fight the Hugo Casey who was asking the questions. So, in actual fact, I thought this was Boris Johnson, a slightly different Boris Johnson to the one we'd seen previously when he'd faced MPs, and trying to at least convey that he did care, whereas others might think not.
Yes, on the hospital ward, he recognised some of us would make it and some of us would not. It was quite a moment. Coming up next, is the Russian government trying to meddle in British politics? Have they been for some time? Discussing that in just a moment. You are watching the press preview. With me now, Theo Usherwood and Allison Morris. Welcome back to both of you as well. Allison, let's go to the top of the front page of the Times, which is about Russia and its targeting of politicians, senior politicians, civil servants and journalists, including, as The Times tells us, a former head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove, in a campaign which dates back to just before the Brexit election, actually.
Well, I mean, apart from the seriousness of it, what a great name for the head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove. It's very Bond body, isn't it? It really is. Yeah, this goes back, obviously, it predates the Brexit vote, and you can see that there was interference here. And also the hacking group, it's called Star Blizzard, again, another very Bond-like name, have been interfering in UK politics and democracy. And think about what happened then after that in terms of Russia and Putin and Ukraine and everything that went on. You can see the amount of information that they have been gleaning and could glean from people could be actually crucial, especially when it comes to the propaganda war as well. Because remember that all wars are fought on two fronts. You know, they're fought obviously in the actual war and then in the propaganda war. But yeah, I mean, I think this is all very reminiscent of the Cold War, isn't it? Except now we have much more sophisticated techniques for spying on people than they would have had then.
Yeah, and straight out of the Putin playbook. Yeah. That's the point, isn't it? This was his bread and butter. This was what he did before.
Yes, and I think it's interesting because there were suspicions at the time about this dossier that Jeremy Corbyn, the then leader of the Labour Party, waved in the air saying it was from the UK-US trade deal that proved, he said, that the NHS was up for sale. Now, you'll remember that at the time, Anna, there was this fear, because the Tories were campaigning for a stronger NHS, building 40 new hospitals, that the NHS could be opened up to US medical firms for privatisation. And the government had been insisting that this was never going to be the case, that the US weren't interested, and even if they were interested, we wouldn't be doing it. And then Jeremy Corbyn got hold of this document and he held a press conference and he was showing that this was proof that actually the government wasn't telling, or the Tory party wasn't telling the truth, and that actually if you voted Conservative, then the NHS wasn't going to be safe from US medical firms, and parts of it could be privatised. Now, it turns out that that document came about, and this is a report in the Times, after Liam Fox, who of course was the International Trade Secretary at the time, his personal email account, the document was on there, and that account was hacked as part of this spear phishing campaign, which the Times reporting that uses specific links that people then click on. This isn't phishing in the usual sense that actually just cast the net out far and wide. It's about targeting individuals to get documents which can then be used to undermine an election. We've got two crucial elections next year. Maybe ours might be late, but as we were discussing, but we've got two. We've got the US, we've got the presidential election, the UK election, and of course this is going to raise significant fears that again this election could be vulnerable to hacking attempts or the Russians trying to influence it in some way.
And to increase the sort of Bondesque bit of it, it's all run by a bodybuilder, but as Theo was saying, it's all very critical. Just a quick look at this one. May not have time to talk about it. The whole point is the BBC licence fee has gone up, despite what Rishi Sunak was concerned about, but threatening to send TV licence defaulters to jail is morally indefensible. So the Culture Secretary and the Conservative government still, having a go at this. 10 seconds, Alison, if you don't mind.
It is. It's completely immoral to send someone to jail for that. And our prisons are overflowing full of people who owe fines, and that is not what prisons are meant to be for. I think there's another way to try and get that money back without sending people to prison.
OK, we'll see if they target that as well. Alison, Theo, thank you both very much indeed.